Use your common sense. We don't have money to lend to a poor farmer, haha.
When I went to discuss a loan, the banker Tom said with a satisfied smile. It seemed pointless to say anything more to this man. I sighed inwardly and told him what I had been thinking. Well then, I'll stop lending out my land. Then, Tom looked stunned for a moment before bursting into laughter.
A poor guy like you, lending land to a bank? What are you talking about?
Tom was rolling with laughter, but he had no idea that in a few minutes, he would be trembling with a pale face. My name is David Harris. I'm a 51-year-old farmer in my hometown. I used to work in a popular chain restaurant in New York when I was younger, but I quit and returned home when my grandparents' health deteriorated. For more than 20 years, I have been growing vegetables on the farm, following in the footsteps of my grandparents. Some might wonder why I, their grandson, took over my grandparents' farm instead of my parents. The answer is simple. I have no parents. Originally, I lived in another state with my parents, but my dad disappeared when I was in elementary school. He left a note behind him and disappeared. Unable to sustain ourselves, my mom and I depended on my grandparents' home. Afterward, as my mom went to work, I was raised by my farming grandparents. But those peaceful days were once again shattered by sadness. When I was just 10, I received the news that my mom had died in a car accident while working in the city. From then on, I was officially raised by my grandparents, and we lived as a family of 3. As a child, I felt guilty for relying on my grandparents and begged them to let me help with the farming.
What are you talking about? You're still a kid. Kids should just play and have fun.
But I want to help you. Plus, I'm interested in growing vegetables.
After I repeatedly asked, my grandparents reluctantly allowed me to help them. Every day, they happily taught me various ways to grow vegetables. It seems they were particularly pleased not because I wanted to help, but because I showed interest in vegetables. They would smile every day as they let me ride the tractor for farm work.
Many kids hate vegetables, but you eat everything we give you. We're so glad.
And to think you're interested in growing them too. We're lucky to have such a grandchild.
My grandparents, working under the open sky every day, had faces well tanned and deeply wrinkled from decades of exposure to the sun. Their faces, weathered from decades of sun and wind, crinkled in laughter as they patted my head, filling me with warmth inside. They looked after me, providing warm meals and bed. But I knew they cried in front of my mom's portrait after I went to bed. I vividly remember that scene. Waking up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom, I noticed light leaking from a room and curiously peeked through the gap in the doors. There, my usually cheerful grandmother was sobbing, bent over in front of my mom's photo. Beside her, my grandfather, who had become much thinner, supported her.
At least let us raise him properly in place of our daughter.
He would say, comforting her repeatedly. That was the first time I realized that my grandparents were also captured by deep sorrow. Since then, I've done everything I could to brighten my grandparents' spirits in place of my mom. Helping on the farm was part of that plan, and I tried to fill the house with laughter every day by saying funny things to make my grandparents smile. I don't know if that was the reason, but the crying from the altar room decreased at night, and the 3 of us gradually built a peaceful daily life. By the time I was in high school, my grandparents got old and couldn't farm on the scale they used to. We then started leasing out the land, significantly reducing our harvest. At that time, the only crops we grew were cabbages, which required wide land but less labor, and cherry tomatoes, which could be harvested in abundance even from small plots.
With just this much, we can manage farming on our own. So don't worry about us and leave this rural area. Pursue a career you love instead of sticking to farming.
But I was thinking of continuing farming after graduating high school.
I intended to honor my grandparents and tried hard to convince them. However, they both shook their heads and encouraged me to pursue higher education and employment in a different industry in the city.
I've talked to your teachers, and you're smart enough, right? The future of farming is going to be tough with cheap imported vegetables.
That's why I want to help with the farming, to give you and Grandma a break.
To my surprise, it was my grandmother who looked stern at my words.
What grandparents would want to be at ease at the expense of their grandchild's life? We're happiest when you have a happy life.
I was glad to hear my grandmother's feelings, but I still couldn't make up my mind to leave my family home. I was naturally worried about my grandparents, but perhaps I also felt a sense of insecurity about living alone. As if seeing through my anxious feelings, my grandfather relaxed his expression.
Step away from farming for a while and go find what you truly want to do. Study a lot in the city, and if you still want to farm afterward, come back here. Then maybe you can teach us about the new farming of your generation, more advanced than what we have now.
Yeah, I understand.
In the end, I went on to a prestigious university in the state. There, I studied computer software in the engineering department. I had been devoted to farming since I was a child, but during high school, I first touched a computer at my friend's house and was completely captivated by its charm. So when it was said to think beyond agriculture, the first thing that came to mind was computer software. Later, I got a job as a programmer in a big company in the city. At the time, I worked desperately from morning to night on the latest technologies and setups related to computers, which were still rare. A new life, a meaningful job. As I worked frantically amidst the whirlwind of information, about 10 years had passed before I knew it. I made sure to return home for the holidays and Christmas. But gradually, due to the business of work, my visits became less frequent. Every year, I saw my grandparents getting smaller and reminded them to take care of their health. But I still didn't fully understand. I was made painfully aware of my foolishness again by a phone call. The shrill ring in the early morning brought back the childhood memory of the news of my mom's passing. With cold sweat on my forehead and trembling fingers, I picked up my phone to hear my grandmother's sobbing voice.
Grandpa has collapsed.
I hurried back to my hometown and went to the hospital where my grandmother had directed me. Apparently, my grandfather had worked too hard in the rain and was brought in just a step away from pneumonia. I was told there was no danger to his life, but seeing grandfather lying on the stark white hospital sheets, as thin as a dried up tree, I felt a tight grip on my heart.
Grandpa, to end up like this.
I'm sorry for calling so early in the morning. I was startled and upset.
My grandmother, who accompanied my grandfather to his bed and repeatedly apologized to me, already has a round back. When had my grandparents become so frail? Yet, I had been living away, forgetting about my hometown. Shocked, I decided to return to my hometown that very day. Again, my grandparents tried to stop me.
It's my life. Let me do what I want. If I don't return to Grandpa's house now, I'll regret it for the rest of my life.
I asserted my own will, even though I didn't want to inconvenience my company. I expressed my desire to resign and began handing over my work. My boss, Kevin, who had looked after me since I joined the company, tried to persuade me to stay, but knowing my determination was firm, Kevin smiled wryly.
It's a shame you're leaving, David. Your innovative ideas were a good motivation for the other employees. If you ever have any trouble, call me anytime.
I thought it was an overestimation, but I was genuinely pleased that he was sorry to see me go. Thus, I ended my corporate life and returned to my hometown. My grandparents were ultimately pleased, and they enjoyed living with me again after more than a decade. When I actually went out to the fields, I saw that they had significantly downscaled since my high school days. Most of the unused land was leased out, but there were still large areas overrun with weeds. Seeing the ample space available, my eyes lit up because I had been nurturing a plan since my days working in the city.
Grandpa, can I grow what I love here?
Do whatever you like. I'm planning to leave all the farming to you in the future, so go ahead and try.
And so, I began growing something different right away. It was herbs, which nobody locally had even considered cultivating. Nowadays, you can buy them easily at any supermarket. But back then, herbs were still a novel ingredient. I saw a promising future in herbs, not only for cooking, but also for their edible and aromatic qualities. Fortunately, there was equipment that grandfather had used in the past for cultivating cherry tomatoes in a greenhouse, so I started growing seedlings there. While primarily producing for restaurants, I also humbly asked local supermarkets to create a section for my herbs. Luckily, herbs were starting to become popular, and my herb farm had a more successful start than I anticipated. After a few years, the sales from my herbs surpassed my grandparents. Having aged significantly, my grandparents took the opportunity to leave the entire management to me. My herb garden has become well known locally, and every time neighbors compliment me saying, "What a good grandchild," my grandparents beam with pride. Eventually, people asked to buy herbs for their home gardens, and some even noticed the flowers and asked me to sell bouquets, making my place a local landmark.
Our vegetables filled everyone's stomachs, but your herbs satisfy their hearts as well.
My grandmother said, making me blush. But just when I felt I had finally honored my grandparents, they both passed away one after the other.
You've become so accomplished. We're truly happy. Having a grandchild who makes others smile has made us very fortunate.
Now alone, I savored the loneliness, but also deeply engraved their words in my heart. I owe my current self to taking over my grandparents' farming. From now on, my goal is to expand this farm. With that in mind, I decided to expand the business and plan to ask the bank for a loan. Thank you for seeing me today. The bank I visited was a local one. The man handling the loan, Tom, introduced himself with a seemingly friendly smile. Having taken over my grandparents' farm, I needed a substantial amount of money to expand it further. That's why I thought of asking the bank for a loan.
There's no need to be so nervous. Please relax.
Thank you. A friend introduced me to you, and I'm relieved to see you're a kind person. I accidentally let my true feelings slip, and Tom laughed out loud. However, as our conversation drifted to small talk, Tom showed no interest in asking about my business plan. At this rate, I was just wasting time, thinking it was impolite but necessary. I interrupted the conversation and pulled out the business plan I had brought. This is my business plan, and to start explaining.
No need to go on. I don't see anything particular that needs discussing.
I tried to discuss the essence of my business, but Tom scoffed and cut off the conversation. Feeling uncertain about what was happening, I hesitantly asked, "Does this mean today is just a preliminary meeting?"
No, I'm saying I won't give you a loan. There's no need to have a meaningless discussion.
With that, Tom directed an unpleasant gaze at me.
Seriously, discussing important loans in muddy work clothes shows a lack of seriousness. And that's your truck parked outside, right?
Tom pointed to the parking lot visible from the window. Indeed, the mini truck I had hurriedly driven to the bank was parked there.
We can't provide a loan to someone who drives a vehicle like that.
I apologized for my attire. I had urgent work and came directly from the field. I was originally planning to wear a suit to request the loan. However, About an hour before the appointment, I got a call from someone interested in seeing the current state of my herb farm, and I was showing them around until just before the meeting. Because of that, I didn't have time to go home and change, so I decided it was better to come in my work clothes and truck than to be late. All this was to get my business plan reviewed and secure a loan from the bank. I tried once more to get Tom to listen, pulling out my business plan again in front of him. If you could just understand what this plan is about, I'm sure you would see the potential. I've been developing this plan for years. Please, just take a look.
Enough already. You're being persistent.
Tom snapped unbelievably, brushing my arm away roughly. Worse yet, he grabbed the business plan from my hands, tore it up, and threw it in the trash. Stunned by his actions, I could only gaze in dismay at the remnants of my plan. Tom sneered with satisfaction.
Use your common sense. Banks only lend to clients who have a prospect of repayment. We don't have money to lend to a poor farmer, ha ha ha.
It seemed pointless to say anything more to this man. I sighed inwardly and told him what I had been thinking. Well then, I'll stop lending out the land. Then, Tom looked stunned for a moment before bursting into laughter.
Lend land? What are you talking about? We don't need to borrow land from a poor farmer like you. You'd better become a comedian instead of a farmer.
He continued laughing heartily as he opened the door wide.
Thank you for your time. Please exit this way.
He indicated that it was time for me to leave. Confused, I returned to the parking lot. Actually, this loan meeting was arranged through a connection. A well-connected acquaintance who had deep ties with this bank praised my business plan and insisted on setting up a meeting with a local bank. Believing his words, I attended today's meeting, but it seems Tom was unaware that I was referred. I settled back into the seat of my truck, sighed deeply, and decided to call my acquaintance. The phone connected after just 3 rings.
Already done talking? Did you get the full loan?
The cheerful inquiry came from Kevin, my former boss when I was a company employee. He has since been promoted to executive vice president and is quite well connected. Kevin had arranged the talk, encouraging me to seek financing from a local bank, which led to this loan discussion. I couldn't hide my perplexity as I honestly explained what had just happened. I was rejected, not just partial, but I wasn't even allowed to discuss the loan.
What do you mean by that?
I could tell from his tone over the phone that Kevin was taking this very seriously. After I explained everything from start to finish about how Tom had treated me, Kevin let out a deep sigh.
It seems there was a mix-up at the bank. I'll check it right now, but please could you wait there?
As Kevin was a benefactor, I felt obliged to stay. I wanted to go back and take care of my herbs, but I decided to wait a bit longer out of respect for him. Just 10 minutes later, an elderly man hurried out of the bank in a fluster.
David, please wait. Let me speak with you again.
He ran up to my truck, his face pale, and introduced himself as the bank president.
I just received a call from Kevin and finally understood the situation. I am terribly sorry for the oversight. I have no excuse.
So you're saying a loan for me is out of the question? As I responded, the president shook his head vigorously. Just then, Tom appeared. Following the president, John.
John, are you all right? You suddenly turned pale and ran off. I was worried.
It's far from all right. Who do you think this man is?
The president snapped, glaring at Tom. But Tom, with a misplaced smile, started to say something outrageous.
Still hanging around? You were probably just waiting in the parking lot, planning to make a scene, weren't you?
Tom accused me, frowning in my direction, before turning to flash an ingratiating smile at the bank president.
I'll take care of this poor guy right now. It's best if you go back inside the bank so you don't have to be bothered by this.
You really haven't heard anything, have you? This man is not a poor farmer. Moreover, it's disgraceful to change your attitude based on the customer.
As he watched the bank president's anger intensify, Tom initially stood with his eyes and mouth wide open in shock. However, as he realized that the president's anger was directed at him, he gradually began to lose his composure.
What's this this farmer done to deserve your anger? I don't see why you're so upset.
This David is introduced by Kevin Foster from Foster Inc., one of our bank's largest clients.
Revealed the president, causing Tom to pale and tremble. Kevin is a member of my former employer's managing family, viewed as the next president, and Foster Inc. has had long-standing relations with this bank. That's why he personally referred me.
I had informed Tom here that David was coming at this time today for a loan consultation, and yet he failed the review. What were you thinking?
Well, that's...
Tom finally seemed to grasp the gravity of the situation. Tom turned deathly pale and began to tremble. His frightened eyes darted between me and the bank president, and I thought he might simply apologize. Indeed, I had been treated harshly earlier, but I was also a loan prospect referred by Kevin. I wanted to resolve the situation amicably if possible, but it seemed Tom did not feel the same way. Hindered by his pride, he glared at me resentfully and muttered complaints.
I'm very sorry for that. But if I may say so, this man came here in this mini truck.
Tom pointed out defiantly, even as I, and even the president, were stunned by his persistence. Despite being so firmly warned, it's puzzling what more this man could possibly have to say. Yet, seeing our speechless, astonished expressions, Tom seemed to believe that he had somehow managed to convince us with his words. Tom regained some color in his cheeks and began vigorously defending his stance.
No matter who recommends them, if a person doesn't have the ability to repay a loan, the bank can't provide financing. That's what I thought.
Tom gestured between my dirty work clothes and the parked mini truck, proudly continuing his argument.
Even if there's a major corporation backing him, if the person is a poor farmer, we cannot extend a loan. Moreover, providing a loan just because he's acquainted with a valued client would indeed be changing our stance based on the person.
So you decided that, right?
The president's calm voice finally halted Tom's tirade. Forgetting his earlier fury, the president spoke quietly, which seemed to perplex Tom even more.
As bankers, it's crucial for us to thoroughly investigate our clients' information. I thought I had taught you that, Tom.
But, based on the information about David's clothes and the vehicle he owns, that's how I judged.
Tom persisted stubbornly, only for the president's patience to snap.
Don't be foolish. Anyone working at this bank should know. David is a major landowner who has been leasing land to this bank since his grandfather's time.
Leasing land. So, what he said earlier was true.
Tom's jaw dropped as he shook slightly, staring at me. It was almost comical to see his shocked expression, and I struggled to contain my laughter. When my grandfather scaled back his farming, a lot of land became vacant. Thinking it wasteful to leave it unused, he leased it out to various parties, with this bank being one of the largest lessees. The area around this bank, the access roads, the parking lot, it was all on land my grandfather had leased to the bank. And now, I've inherited the land and continue to lease it unchanged. Although I had to sell many plots to pay inheritance taxes, I still own the area around this bank. That's why the bank president was so pale and scolding Tom.
Kevin's referral is a good enough reason in itself, but more importantly, our bank has been indebted to your family for generations. How could you dare speak so rudely to David?
I didn't know. If I had been informed earlier, I wouldn't have disparaged the mini truck.
Confused and cornered by the president's rebuke, Tom started making excuses, almost as if to suggest that I was the one at fault. Thoroughly exasperated, I finally spoke up, including that I had prepared a business plan. And yet, you tore it up without even looking at it, Tom.
You tore up a client's documents?
The president exploded upon hearing this new information, his anger reaching new heights. In front of the bank president, who seemed steaming mad, Tom had gone pale and shrunk in on himself, barely able to breathe.
I didn't do such a thing. Could this be a misunderstanding, David? There's no evidence that I did what you claim.
There is evidence.
A young banker approached us and said that he was holding the trash can where Tom had thrown away the documents at that time. Inside it, predictably, were my business plans, torn to shreds.
It seemed that the loan discussion ended much sooner than expected. So while cleaning the room in surprise, I found these important documents thrown away and brought them here.
Mind your own business.
Enraged, Tom lunged at the young banker, but he was swiftly restrained by the president's firm grip.
That's enough. No more disgraceful behavior, Tom. I will decide your fate later. Stay at home and reflect on your actions until then.
Please believe me, John. I was just working hard, trying to generate the most profit for the bank. It's all been in an effort to serve our bank's interests.
Tom was making a pitiful excuse, but it only highlighted his bias and misguided efforts. As Tom was dragged out by other bankers and security, he shot me a resentful look.
No matter if you're a landowner with influential connections, you yourself are nothing special. No matter how much money we lend you, your herb farm will just end up failing.
No worries there. My Harris herb farm is doing quite well and increasing its revenues, I replied calmly, which caused Tom to gasp and stumble over his words.
Harris Herb Farm? Is that the enterprise that's been supported as a model for regional revitalization, receiving requests from urban restaurants and local supermarkets, booming with business?
Oh, you knew? You should have read my business plan then. If Tom hadn't been so focused on finding fault and had actually looked at the documents, he might have realized who I really am. I wasn't considering a loan due to financial troubles. On the contrary, I was planning to seek additional funds to establish a new farm in the cooler highlands. Considering the future growth, the herb farm I started is showing steady sales. Just as Tom mentioned earlier, plans were underway to expand the varieties and stagger production times by building a new farm in a neighboring county. Logically, I should have approached a major urban bank for financing considering the scale of the expansion. But I had chosen this local bank out of loyalty to the relationship that spanned my grandparents' time, and because Kevin had requested it. But if the loan officer dislikes me this much, I guess there's no helping it. If this bank thinks it's too risky, maybe I should consider other banks.
Wait, David.
The president implored as I walked away, not even glancing back at Tom, who stood frozen. It was unfortunate for the president, who wasn't directly involved in the mishap, but part of his job was to manage his staff properly. Tom looked down on me simply because I appeared poor, unrelated to the fact that I own land or am acquainted with Kevin. I can't feel comfortable seeking a loan from a bank that employs such a banker. Unconcerned, I got into my mini truck and quietly pressed on the accelerator. In the rearview mirror, I saw Tom collapse to the ground with a look of utter misery, but soon he was out of sight. Later on, that local bank unfortunately went under. Apparently, a group of high school girls overheard my departing comment that day.
Hey, did you hear? This bank is in trouble. What? It's going to fail? I need to withdraw my savings.
It was a misunderstanding, but unluckily, the rumor that the bank is unstable spread wildly through this high school girl's friend. The information that the bank is in trouble spread to her parents and then to their workplaces. As a result of many people, unaware of the rumor's origin, believing that the bank was facing financial difficulties, they all rushed to the bank's counters to withdraw their savings. Due to numerous withdrawals, the bank, which should have had no issues originally, experienced withdrawals of approximately $2 billion over a few days and ultimately collapsed. The bank president and other employees managed to find jobs at different banks, but Tom alone found no one willing to hire him. Rumors spread that Tom was the cause of the collapse, earning him the nickname Tom the Bank Buster. Tom disappeared from town. Rumors suggest that Tom was sued for damages for ruining his transaction with me, and that he fell into debt with unscrupulous lenders due to financial difficulties. But the only certainty was that I would no longer see Tom. Meanwhile, after that incident, I sought financing from another bank and successfully received a loan. Now, I'm constructing a new herb garden in the cooler highlands of a neighboring state. My business is thriving. It's growing smoothly and is well loved for its relaxing, verdant environment. We've even established a restaurant within the herb garden, where we use freshly picked herbs and other vegetables from our own farm to prepare dishes for our guests. Now, more people come for the meals than for the herbs themselves. Additionally, we offer a variety of products like herb bouquets, cookies, cakes, and herbal teas. On weekends, many families visit, turning it into a garden filled with greenery and smiles. As I watch this scene, I speak in my heart to my grandparents. Grandpa, you'd be pleased to see me making people smile with my work. I'll keep striving to make you proud. So please watch over me. As I look up at the clear blue sky, a gentle breeze seems to answer, softly rustling the herbs.